Wyoming Territory, 1878. Samuel Hartfield stared at the blank page before him, the oil lamp casting long shadows across the weathered kitchen table. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled against the cabin walls, a lonely sound that matched the emptiness in his heart. 3 months since Elizabeth had passed, and the weight of raising 4 children alone pressed down on him like the mountains looming outside their window. His calloused fingers gripped the pencil tighter as he began to write. Housekeeper wanted. Room and board provided plus modest wage. Must be capable with children and household duties. Inquire at Hartfield Ranch, 5 miles north of Meadow Creek. Samuel read the words again, unsure if he was doing the right thing. But the children needed someone. They needed a woman's touch that he simply couldn't provide. James at 12 was trying to be the man of the house too soon. Emma at 10 mothered her younger siblings when she should be enjoying childhood. The twins, William and Martha, just 6 years old, still cried for their mother at night. Pa. James appeared in the doorway, his nightshirt hanging loosely on his growing frame. Are you coming to bed? Samuel folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket. Soon, son. Just finishing up some business. The advertisement for a housekeeper? James asked, his young face serious beyond his years. Samuel sighed. There was little that escaped his eldest. Yes, I'll take it to town tomorrow. We don't need a stranger, Pa. I can help more. Emma too. You help plenty already. Samuel stood and rested his hand on his son's shoulder. But you and your siblings need to be children, not little adults. We need help, son. That's all there is to it. James looked away, and Samuel recognized the struggle in his son's face. The battle between understanding and feeling like this new person might somehow replace their mother. No one could ever take your mother's place, Samuel said softly. But we need to keep going. She would want that. James nodded slowly, and Samuel guided him back to bed, tucking him in beside his sleeping brother. In the girls' room, he adjusted the covers over Emma and Martha before retreating to his own cold, empty bed. Tomorrow, he would post the advertisement and place their future in God's hands. Grace Jameson stepped off the stagecoach into the dusty main street of Meadow Creek, clutching her carpetbag and trying not to look as desperate as she felt. After 3 days of travel from Denver, her blue calico dress was wrinkled, and her dark hair was coming loose from its pins despite her best efforts. First time in Meadow Creek, the driver asked as he handed down her trunk. Yes, she replied, scanning the modest collection of buildings that made up the town. A general store, a saloon, a small church, and what appeared to be a combination hotel and restaurant stood along the dirt road. Business or pleasure, miss? He continued, clearly trying to make conversation. Business, she said firmly. I'm here about a position. The driver nodded knowingly. Not many positions for unmarried ladies around these parts unless you're a schoolteacher or, he stopped abruptly, perhaps realizing his next suggestion wouldn't be appropriate. Grace straightened her spine. I'm seeking respectable employment, sir. Would you direct me to the hotel? I need accommodations while I settle my affairs. Right there, he pointed to the 2-story building with a painted sign reading Meadow Creek Hotel and Dining. Mrs. Patterson runs it. She's a decent sort. Grace thanked him and made her way to the hotel, the weight of her decisions pressing on her shoulders. At 26, she had left behind everything familiar after the school where she had taught for 5 years closed permanently. With her parents gone and no siblings, she had nothing keeping her in Denver. The advertisement she'd seen in a Denver newspaper had seemed like providence, a chance for a fresh start far from painful memories. After securing a modest room, Grace asked Mrs. Patterson about the location of the general store. Need to pick up a few things, dear, the motherly innkeeper asked. Actually, I'm inquiring about a position at a ranch outside town. I thought the store might have information. Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose. You wouldn't be talking about the Hartfield place, would you? Samuel Hartfield posted for a housekeeper a few weeks back. Grace nodded, relief flooding through her that the position might still be available. Poor man, Mrs. Patterson continued, lowering her voice. Lost his wife to fever this past winter. Left him with 4 children to raise. Hard-working rancher, respected in these parts. The position might not be filled yet. Folks around here are settled, and not many single women pass through looking for work. Could you direct me to the store, please? I'd like to inquire as soon as possible. Of course, dear. Though, Mrs. Patterson gave her a careful once-over. You don't strike me as the housekeeping type, if you don't mind my saying. Those hands haven't seen much hard labor. Grace self-consciously tucked her hands into the folds of her skirt. I'm stronger than I look, Mrs. Patterson, and I'm quite willing to learn whatever I don't already know. The woman seemed unconvinced but gave directions to the general store. As Grace turned to leave, Mrs. Patterson added, Mr. Thomas at the store can point you to someone with a wagon heading that way. It's too far to walk, especially for a city lady. The implication that she wasn't suited for frontier life stung, but Grace merely thanked her and headed to the store. She had $5 to her name, a trunk of possessions, and determination born of necessity. She couldn't afford to fail. At the general store, the proprietor confirmed the position was still open and directed her to a rancher named Oliver Wilson who would be heading north past the Hartfield ranch the following morning. He's reliable, Mr. Thomas assured her. Stops here every other Thursday for supplies. He'll be loading up early tomorrow, say 7 o'clock. Grace agreed and spent her evening reviewing what little she knew about housekeeping on a ranch. Her experience was in teaching children, not maintaining a home, but she had grown up helping her mother with household tasks. She could cook simple meals, mend clothing, and keep a tidy home. The rest, she would learn. She fell asleep that night to the unfamiliar sounds of a frontier town, wondering what Samuel Hartfield and his children would be like, and whether they would find her suitable for the position that now represented her only hope. Samuel wiped sweat from his brow as he finished mending the corral fence. The June sun beat down mercilessly, and he was behind on a dozen tasks that needed his attention. James was helping with the horses, working alongside him as they completed morning chores. Pa! Emma's voice carried across the yard. Someone's coming. Samuel shaded his eyes against the sun and spotted Oliver Wilson's wagon approaching with two figures on the seat, Oliver himself and a woman in a blue dress. That's Oliver, Samuel told James. Looks like he's brought someone with him. James frowned. For the housekeeper position? Maybe. Let's go see. They crossed the yard to where Emma stood on the porch, her blonde hair braided neatly down her back. Martha peeked around her sister, thumb in her mouth, a habit she'd resumed after her mother's death. Where's William? Samuel asked. Playing with his soldiers in the kitchen, Emma replied, her eyes fixed on the approaching wagon. The wagon rolled to a stop, and Oliver called out a greeting. Morning, Sam. Brought someone who's asking after that position you posted. Samuel approached as Oliver helped the woman down from the wagon. She was of medium height, with dark hair tucked beneath a modest bonnet. Her blue calico dress was clean but travel-worn, and she carried a carpetbag in one hand. Samuel Hartfield. He introduced himself, extending his hand. Grace Jameson, she replied, her voice clear and pleasant as she briefly took his hand. I saw your advertisement in a Denver newspaper. Samuel was surprised. Denver? You've come quite a distance. I was seeking a change, she said simply, her brown eyes meeting his steadily. There was something composed about her that didn't quite match his mental image of a housekeeper, but there was also a quiet determination in her bearing. Well, Miss Jameson, this is my eldest, James, Samuel said, motioning to his son. And these are my daughters, Emma and Martha. My younger son, William, is inside. The children regarded her with varying degrees of wariness, though Emma offered a small curtsy. I'll be on my way, Oliver said, tipping his hat. Mrs. Patterson said to tell you the lady paid for a room in town, so you can send her back with me on my return if things don't work out. Something like embarrassment crossed Grace's features at this frank discussion of her situation, but she maintained her composure. Thank you for the ride, Mr. Wilson, she said. After Oliver departed, an awkward silence fell. Samuel realized he hadn't properly thought through the interview process. What did one ask a potential housekeeper? Perhaps we could talk inside? Grace suggested gently. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about my qualifications. Yes, of course, Samuel said, gesturing toward the house. Emma, would you fetch your brother? As they entered the main room of the ranch house, Samuel saw it through a stranger's eyes. The scuffed floor that needed sweeping, the pile of mending in the corner, the unwashed breakfast dishes. He'd been keeping things functional, but little more. Grace set her bag down and removed her bonnet, revealing dark hair pulled back in a simple knot. She glanced around, but made no comment about the state of the house. I should be direct, Miss Jameson, Samuel began as they seated themselves at the kitchen table. I'm looking for someone to keep house and help with the children. The position includes room and board. William, Samuel admonished, embarrassment heating his face. Grace knelt to the boy's level. No, William. I'm interviewing to be your housekeeper. That means I would cook meals, keep the house tidy, and help take care of you and your siblings. But not be our mother, William clarified, looking simultaneously relieved and disappointed. No one can replace your mother, Grace said gently. I wouldn't try to. Samuel watched the exchange with interest. She had a natural way with children, that was evident. Miss Jameson, would you mind if I spoke with the children privately for a moment? He asked. Of course, she replied. I can wait on the porch if you prefer. Once Grace had stepped outside, Samuel gathered his children around him. What do you think? He asked them. She talks like a teacher, James said immediately, not sounding entirely pleased about it. She seems nice, Emma offered, and she didn't act disgusted about the messy house. Does she know how to make cookies? William wanted to know. Martha, who hadn't spoken a word since Grace's arrival, tugged on Samuel's sleeve. She has kind eyes, Pa, she whispered. Samuel considered their responses. We need help, he said finally, and we may not get many applicants out this far. I'm thinking we could give Miss Jameson a trial period, say 2 weeks. If it doesn't work out, no hard feelings. The children nodded, though James still looked skeptical. Samuel called Grace back inside and made the offer. It's not that I doubt your capabilities, he explained, but ranch life takes some adjustment. A trial period would let us all see if the arrangement suits. That seems perfectly reasonable, Grace agreed. When would you like me to start? No time like the present, if you're willing. I can take you to town tomorrow to collect your trunk. Grace smiled for the first time since arriving, transforming her serious face. Then I accept your terms, Mr. Hartfield. I look forward to proving myself useful to your family. As Samuel showed her to the small bedroom off the kitchen that would be hers, he wondered if he was making the right decision. There was something about Grace Jameson that didn't quite fit his idea of a frontier housekeeper, a refinement, perhaps, or a hint of mystery in her eyes. But the children needed someone, and his instincts told him she was trustworthy. What he couldn't know was how completely Grace Jameson would transform their lives, or the secrets she carried from her past that might eventually threaten the fragile new beginning they were all about to embrace. Grace woke before dawn the next morning, the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch house settling around her. The small room was plain but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small table with a wash basin. Through the thin walls, she could hear the deep, rhythmic breathing of someone in the next room. Samuel, she presumed. The thought brought a flush to her cheeks. She hadn't fully considered what it would mean to live under the same roof as a man who was neither relation nor employer in the formal sense of city life. Out here, the boundaries seemed different, less rigid, though propriety would still need to be maintained. She dressed quickly in her second-best dress, a serviceable brown cotton, and pinned her hair in a simple style. There would be no need for city fashions here. Practicality would reign. When she entered the kitchen, she was surprised to find Samuel already there, building up the fire in the cook's stove. Good morning, he said, straightening. You're up early. I thought to prepare breakfast before everyone woke, she explained. That's usually my task, he said with a small smile. But I'm happy to relinquish it. Coffee's brewing. Grace set to work familiarizing herself with the kitchen. It was reasonably well stocked, if somewhat disorganized. She found flour, salt, and lard for biscuits, and eggs in a basket by the door. Bacon hung from a hook in the small pantry. As she worked, Samuel sat at the table with a cup of coffee, watching her movements. She felt his eyes on her, but tried to appear unconcerned. You mentioned you were a teacher, he said after a time. What subjects? All of them, Grace replied, cutting lard into flour for biscuits. It was a small school. I taught children from 6 to 14 years of age, everything from reading and arithmetic to history and basic sciences. That's impressive. She shrugged. It's what was needed. Out here, we all do what's needed, don't we? Indeed we do. He sipped his coffee. If you don't mind my asking, why leave teaching? And why come all the way to Wyoming Territory? Grace's hands stilled momentarily. She had anticipated this question, but still found herself choosing her words carefully. The school closed due to lack of funds. With no family remaining in Denver, I saw no reason to stay when opportunities might be found elsewhere. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. I'm sorry about your family, Samuel said quietly. Thank you. It's been some time now. Grace put the biscuits in the oven and turned to face him. And you? Mrs. Patterson mentioned you lost your wife recently. I'm very sorry for your loss. Pain flickered across his features. Elizabeth passed in February. Fever took her quickly. He stared into his coffee cup. The children have handled it as well as can be expected, but they need. He trailed off. A woman's influence. Grace suggested gently. Stability, he amended. Someone who isn't drowning in grief while trying to keep everything else afloat. The honest admission touched Grace. Before she could respond, the sound of small feet padded down the hallway, and Martha appeared, her nightgown trailing on the floor, blonde hair tousled from sleep. Good morning, Grace said warmly. You're just in time to help me with breakfast. The little girl regarded her solemnly for a moment before approaching. What can I do? She asked in a small voice. Could you set the table? I'm sure you know where everything belongs. Martha nodded and began carefully placing plates and utensils while Grace finished preparing the meal. By the time the biscuits were golden brown, the bacon crisp, and the eggs scrambled, the rest of the children had appeared. Breakfast was a somewhat awkward affair, with the children stealing glances at Grace when they thought she wasn't looking. James, in particular, seemed to be assessing her, his young face serious beyond his years. These biscuits are real good, William finally declared through a mouthful of food. William, don't speak with your mouth full, Emma corrected automatically. The biscuits are indeed excellent, Samuel agreed. Thank you, Miss Jameson. Please, call me Grace, she offered. And thank you. I thought perhaps after breakfast, Emma might show me around the house so I can better understand my duties. Emma straightened, clearly pleased to be given responsibility. I can do that. And I need to go into town to collect my trunk, Grace continued, looking to Samuel. I'll hitch up the wagon after breakfast, he confirmed. James, you'll need to take care of the morning chores while I'm gone. Yes, sir, James replied, though he didn't look pleased about his father leaving with Grace. After the meal, Emma proved to be an efficient guide, showing Grace through the modest ranch house with its 3 bedrooms, main living area, and kitchen. The house was solidly built but showed signs of neglect that had begun before Elizabeth's passing. Worn floorboards that needed oiling, curtains that needed mending, a general layer of dust on less used surfaces. Mother was sick for a while before she died, Emma explained quietly when she caught Grace examining a particularly dusty shelf. She couldn't keep up with everything, and Pa didn't notice things like dust. Few men do, Grace replied with understanding. We'll set things to rights together. Emma hesitated, then asked, Did you really come all the way from Denver just to be a housekeeper? The perceptiveness of the question took Grace by surprise. I came for a new start, she said honestly. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns, and we find ourselves on paths we hadn't planned. The girl seemed to consider this. Like when Mother died. Yes, something like that. Emma nodded solemnly. I'll help you with the house. I know how Mother liked things. I'd appreciate that very much, Grace said, touched by the offer. It's important to honor your mother's ways. An hour later, Grace found herself beside Samuel in the wagon, heading toward town. The morning was pleasant, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and prairie grass. They traveled mostly in silence, each lost in thought. Your children are a credit to you, Grace finally said. Especially Emma. She's quite mature for her age. Too mature, sometimes, Samuel sighed. She's had to grow up fast these past months. Children are resilient, but they shouldn't have to shoulder adult burdens. That's partly why I advertised for help, he admitted. I could manage the house poorly enough, but the children need more than I can give them alone. As they approached Meadow Creek, Grace gathered her courage. Mr. Hartfield, Samuel, please. Samuel, then. I want to be clear that I understand my position. I'm here to keep your house and help with your children. I don't presume anything beyond that. He glanced at her, a question in his eyes. I never thought you did. No, but others might. A single woman living in a widower's home. People talk. People always talk, he said with a hint of bitterness. But out here, practicality tends to outweigh gossip. A man with 4 children needs help. You need employment. The arrangement makes sense. As long as we understand each other, Grace said, relieved by his matter-of-fact response. They collected her trunk from the hotel, where Mrs. Patterson regarded Samuel with open curiosity. Found your housekeeper already, Mr. Hartfield? She asked, her tone suggesting she found the development interesting indeed. On a trial basis, Samuel replied evenly. Miss Jameson's teaching experience with children was persuasive. Teaching experience? Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose as she looked at Grace with new interest. You didn't mention you were a teacher, dear. It didn't seem relevant to securing lodging, Grace replied with a polite smile. As they drove back to the ranch, Samuel chuckled. Mrs. Patterson will have that information spread throughout town by supper. Does that concern you? Grace asked. Not particularly. Does it concern you? Only if it affects how people treat your children. They shouldn't suffer any discomfort because of me. Samuel's expression softened. You've a kind heart, Grace Jameson. The children are fortunate in that, whatever else comes. The simple compliment warmed her more than it should have. Grace reminded herself firmly that she was here to do a job, nothing more. Samuel Hartfield was her employer, and while she hoped they might become friends of a sort, anything beyond that was neither appropriate nor wise. Yet as they rode back to the ranch, the vast Wyoming sky stretching endlessly above them, Grace couldn't help feeling a strange sense of rightness, as if perhaps this unexpected turn in her life was exactly where she was meant to be. What she couldn't know was that her arrival at the Hartfield ranch had set in motion events that would test her resolve, challenge her secrets, and ultimately offer her the one thing she had never dared hope for, a place to truly belong. 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity as Grace settled into life at the Hartfield ranch. Each day brought new challenges and small victories as she established routines, cleaned neglected corners of the house, and slowly earned the trust of the children. Martha and William had accepted her most readily. Martha followed Grace around the house, watching her work and occasionally offering shy assistance. William peppered her with endless questions about Denver, books, and anything else that crossed his curious mind. Emma had been cautiously helpful, showing Grace how her mother had organized the household and offering insights into her siblings' preferences and habits. There was wariness in the girl, but also a palpable relief at having some of her responsibilities lifted. James remained the most reserved. He was unfailingly polite but kept his distance, watching Grace with a guarded expression that suggested he was waiting for her to make a mistake. On this particular afternoon, Grace was up to her elbows in bread dough when Martha appeared in the kitchen doorway. Miss Grace, the little girl said hesitantly. Can I help? Of course. Grace smiled, wiping flour from her hands. Would you like to knead the dough? Martha nodded eagerly and climbed onto the stool Grace placed at the table. Grace guided the child's small hands, showing her how to push and fold the dough. My mama used to let me help, Martha said quietly. She taught you well, Grace replied, careful not to push the girl to share more than she was comfortable with. I miss her, Martha whispered, eyes fixed on the dough. I know you do, sweetheart. And that's all right. You'll always miss her. Pa says we mustn't cry too much because it makes him sad. Grace's heart constricted. Your pa is sad too, but I think sometimes it's good to cry. Would you like to tell me about your mother? What was she like? Martha's face brightened slightly. She sang all the time, and she made the best apple pie. And she could make James smile even when he was being grumpy. She sounds wonderful, Grace said sincerely. She would like you, Martha declared with childish certainty. You're not as pretty as her, but you're nice. Grace laughed at the backhanded compliment. Thank you, Martha. Are you going to stay? The child asked suddenly, her hands stilling in the dough. The question caught Grace off guard. Well, your father and I agreed to a 2-week trial, which ends today. If he's satisfied with my work, then yes, I'd like to stay. I want you to stay, Martha said firmly. William does too. And I think Emma, but James doesn't. James is protective of your family, Grace said diplomatically. That's a good quality in a big brother. Martha seemed to consider this. Pa's different since you came. He smiles more. Before Grace could respond to this unexpected observation, boots sounded on the porch, and Samuel entered the kitchen. His tall frame filled the doorway, and Grace was struck, not for the first time, by how the outdoor work had tanned his skin and lightened strands of his brown hair to gold. Something smells good, he said, removing his hat. We're making bread, Martha announced proudly. I'm helping. I can see that, Samuel smiled, crossing to the wash basin to clean his hands. You've got flour all over your face, little one. Grace watched the easy affection between father and daughter, a warm feeling spreading through her chest. For all the hardship this family had endured, there was love here, palpable and enduring. "I was hoping to speak with you, Grace," Samuel said, drying his hands. "Today marks 2 weeks." "So it does," she acknowledged, her heart quickening slightly. Despite Martha's assurances that most of the family wanted her to stay, the final decision rested with Samuel. "I'd like you to stay on permanently, if you're willing," he said directly. "The children are happier, the house is running smoothly, and you've proven yourself more than capable." Relief flooded through Grace. "I'd like that very much. Thank you." "Good. That's settled then." Samuel smiled, and Grace noticed a dimple appear in his left cheek, a feature she hadn't observed before. "I've been thinking we should celebrate with a proper Sunday dinner tomorrow. The Wilsons and Pastor Davis could join us." "That's a lovely idea," Grace agreed, mentally cataloging what she would need to prepare such a meal. "Can Miss Grace make apple pie?" Martha asked hopefully. "Like Mama used to make?" A shadow crossed Samuel's face at the mention of Elizabeth's pie, but he recovered quickly. "That's for Miss Grace to decide. We wouldn't want to make extra work for her first proper social occasion with us." "I'd be happy to make apple pie," Grace assured them both, "if Martha will help me." The little girl beamed, and Samuel's expression softened as he looked between his daughter and Grace. "I'll ride to town this afternoon for anything you need," he offered. After making a list of supplies and seeing Samuel off, Grace finished the bread with Martha and set it to rise. She was just wiping down the table when Emma burst through the door, her face flushed. "Miss Grace, come quick. James is hurt." Grace's heart leaped into her throat as she hurried after Emma toward the barn. Inside, they found James sitting on a hay bale, clutching his arm, his face pale beneath his summer tan. "What happened?" Grace asked, kneeling beside him. "The new mare kicked him," William explained, hovering anxiously nearby. "Pa said not to go in her stall alone, but James did anyway." James shot his brother a resentful look. "I was just trying to get her used to me." Grace gently examined the arm, relieved to find no obvious break. "I think it's badly bruised, maybe sprained. We need to wrap it and keep it still. Can you walk to the house?" James nodded stoically, though pain was evident in his eyes. Grace helped him up, and they made their way slowly back to the house, where she set about treating the injury. "Your father will be upset you disobeyed him," she said as she wrapped the arm in a clean bandage. "Are you going to tell him?" James challenged, a hint of defiance in his voice. Grace met his gaze steadily. "No, James. You are." Surprise flickered across his face. "You're not going to lecture me?" "Would it do any good?" she asked mildly. "You know what you did wrong. I trust you to be honest with your father." James studied her, confusion replacing the defiance. "You're not like I expected," he finally said. "Oh, and what did you expect?" He shrugged with his good shoulder. "Someone who'd try to boss us around. Or someone who'd try too hard to replace Ma." "No one can replace your mother, James. I wouldn't insult her memory by trying." "Then why are you here?" he asked bluntly. "Teaching pays better than housekeeping." The perceptive question caught Grace off guard. "Sometimes money isn't the only consideration in life," she said carefully. "You're running from something," James stated with the directness of youth. "I can tell." Grace's hands stilled on the bandage. "What makes you say that?" "The way you watch the road sometimes, like you're expecting someone. And you never talk about Denver except when we ask direct questions." Grace finished securing the bandage, using the task to compose herself. The boy was observant, dangerously so. "We all have parts of our past we don't wish to dwell on, James," she said finally. "But I promise you, I'm not running from the law or anything that would bring harm to your family." He seemed to accept this, nodding slowly. "Pa said you're staying on permanently. If that's all right with you," Grace said, surprising herself with how much his approval mattered. James considered this. "The twins like you. Emma too, though she's afraid to show it. And Pa seems less hollow since you came." "And you?" Grace asked gently. A hint of a smile touched the boy's face. "I'm reserving judgment. But the bread you make is better than Pa's, and you didn't tell on me about the mare, so I guess you can stay." Grace laughed, recognizing the olive branch for what it was. High praise indeed. "Now, rest that arm while I start dinner." When Samuel returned from town later that afternoon, James met him at the door and immediately confessed his disobedience with the mare. Grace, peeling apples at the kitchen table, couldn't hear Samuel's response, but the conversation ended with James helping his father unload supplies one-handed, the tension between them visibly eased. That evening after the children were in bed, Samuel joined Grace on the porch where she was enjoying the cool night air, the day's work finally complete. "Thank you for handling James's injury," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "He told me you were kind but firm." "He's a good boy," Grace replied, testing his boundaries, as boys do. "He also mentioned you didn't give him away, but made him own up to his mistake himself." Grace smiled. "I thought that approach might be more effective than running to you with tales." Samuel nodded thoughtfully. Elizabeth would have done the same. The comparison startled Grace. I didn't mean to overstep." "You didn't," he assured her quickly. "I meant it as a compliment." Elizabeth believed in allowing the children to learn from their mistakes when the stakes weren't too high. They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, the night sounds of the prairie surrounding them. "May I ask you something personal?" Samuel finally said. Grace tensed slightly. "You may ask. I cannot promise to answer." "Fair enough." He turned to face her in the dim light spilling from the window. "Why did you really come all this way from Denver? Teaching is a respectable profession for a woman. Housekeeping for a widower with 4 children seems a significant change." Grace had been expecting this question eventually, but still found herself carefully weighing her words. "There was an incident at the school before it closed," she began slowly. "A prominent man in town had a son in my class. The boy was struggling, and when I reported this, the father took it poorly. He began a campaign to discredit me, suggesting I was incompetent, even immoral." Samuel's expression darkened. "Based on what evidence?" "None," Grace said bitterly. "But he was wealthy and influential. When the school closed due to funding issues, no one else would hire me. The rumors had spread too far." "That's unjust," Samuel said, anger evident in his voice. "Life often is," Grace replied with a small shrug. "I saw your advertisement and thought perhaps here, far from Denver, I could start fresh without shadows from the past." It wasn't the whole truth. Grace had left out the most damning parts: the man's unwanted advances, his rage when she rejected him, and the escalating threats that had finally driven her to flee. But she had shared enough to explain her presence without raising more questions. "Well, I'm sorry for what you endured, but I can't say I'm sorry you ended up here," Samuel said quietly. "The children need you. And he stopped abruptly. "And you?" Grace prompted, her heart beating a little faster. "I found it a great relief to have competent help," he finished smoothly, though Grace sensed he had been about to say something else. "I'm glad to be of service," she replied, keeping her tone light despite a curious disappointment. Samuel rose from his chair. "We should both get some rest. Tomorrow promises to be a busy day with company coming." "Good night, Samuel," Grace said. "Good night, Grace," he replied, his voice warm in the darkness. As she prepared for bed later, Grace reflected on their conversation. She had told Samuel more than she'd intended, yet still far less than the whole truth. The part of her that longed for complete honesty warred with the part that feared the consequences of full disclosure. What would Samuel Hartfield think if he knew everything? Would he still want her in his home, around his children? The question haunted her as she drifted off to sleep, her dreams troubled by pursuing shadows and a pair of kind eyes that turned cold with disappointment. The following weeks brought a rhythm to life at the Hartfield Ranch. Summer bloomed across the Wyoming landscape, painting the prairie with wildflowers and filling the garden with vegetables that Grace carefully tended alongside the children. The Sunday dinner had been a success, with Pastor Davis praising Grace's apple pie and Mrs. Wilson inviting them all to a barn raising the following month. As August approached, Grace found herself feeling more settled than she had in years. The children had fully accepted her presence, even James, who now sought her help with his reading in the evenings. Samuel and Grace had established a comfortable working relationship, with mutual respect and growing friendship evident in their daily interactions. One warm afternoon, Grace sat on the porch shelling peas with Martha and William while Emma hung laundry on the line nearby. Samuel and James were visible in the distance, working with the horses in the corral. "Miss Grace, when's your birthday?" William asked suddenly. "September 30th, she replied, dropping peas into the bowl. "Why do you ask?" "That's not too far away," Martha observed. "Will you have a party?" Grace smiled at the children. "I haven't had a birthday party since I was a little girl." "Everyone should have parties," William declared with the certainty of childhood. "We had a party for Emma's birthday in May, remember? Before you came. Pa made a cake, but it wasn't very good." William, Emma called reproachfully from the clothesline. Well, it wasn't, William insisted. Pa said so himself. Grace laughed. Perhaps I'll make my own cake when the time comes. That's not right, Martha said seriously. Someone else is supposed to make your cake. That's the rule. Is it now? Grace asked, amused. Well, we'll see when the time comes. For now, let's finish these peas for supper. The domestic tranquility was interrupted by the sound of an approaching wagon. Grace shaded her eyes against the sun to see Oliver Wilson's familiar figure on the seat, accompanied by a stranger, a well-dressed man who sat stiffly beside him. Company, Emma observed, pausing in her work. Grace felt an inexplicable tension creep up her spine as the wagon drew closer. Something about the stranger's posture struck a chord of memory that sent warning signals through her mind. Samuel noticed the visitors and walked up from the corral, removing his gloves and wiping his brow. Were we expecting anyone? He asked as he reached the porch. Not that I know of, Grace replied, trying to keep her voice steady as the wagon pulled to a stop. Afternoon, Sam, Oliver called cheerfully. Brought someone looking for your housekeeper. Grace felt the blood drain from her face as the stranger turned, revealing a face she had hoped never to see again. Theodore Carmichael, with his precisely trimmed mustache and cold eyes, looked directly at her with a smile that didn't reach his gaze. Miss Jameson, he said, his cultured voice carrying across the yard. What a pleasant surprise to find you at last. Samuel glanced between them with confusion. You know each other? Before Grace could answer, Carmichael stepped down from the wagon. Indeed we do. Miss Jameson worked for me in Denver. When she disappeared without notice, I was quite concerned. I never worked for you, Mr. Carmichael, Grace said, her voice stronger than she felt. Your son was my student. A technicality. Carmichael waved his hand dismissively. The school was funded primarily by my donations. Samuel's expression had grown watchful. What brings you all this way, Mr. Carmichael? When I discovered Miss Jameson had fled to Wyoming Territory, I felt obligated to warn whoever might be employing her about her tendencies. Tendencies, Samuel repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. Grace stood, anger replacing her initial fear. Mr. Carmichael harbors a grudge because I rejected his advances and reported his son's poor performance at school. Any other allegations he might make are fabrications. Carmichael's face hardened. You see how she twists the truth? This woman fabricated stories about my son to cover her own incompetence, then made scandalous accusations when I sought her dismissal. The children had gone silent, watching the exchange with wide eyes. Emma quietly ushered William and Martha toward the door. Take the children inside, Emma, Samuel said, his gaze never leaving Carmichael. Grace wanted to follow them, to escape this confrontation, but knew running would only make her appear guilty. Instead, she straightened her spine and faced the man who had driven her from her home. I have nothing to hide, Mr. Carmichael, she said clearly. I left Denver because your influence made it impossible for me to find work after you spread rumors about me. I never expected you to follow me hundreds of miles to continue your persecution. Oliver Wilson looked increasingly uncomfortable. Sam, I had no idea there was bad blood here. The gentleman said he was a former employer looking to reconcile with a valued employee. It's not your fault, Oliver, Samuel assured him before turning back to Carmichael. Sir, I don't know what your true purpose is here, but Miss Jameson is under my employment and my protection. Whatever dispute you have with her, I suggest you state it plainly or take your leave. Carmichael's expression darkened. Your protection? I see how it is. She's found herself another protector. Tell me, Hartfield, has she mentioned she was dismissed from her teaching position for improper relations with a married man? Or that she attempted to extort money from me by threatening my reputation? Grace gasped at the blatant lies. That's false. I was never dismissed, the school closed. And I never, enough, Samuel cut in, his voice like steel. Mr. Carmichael, I don't take kindly to anyone coming onto my property and insulting a lady under my roof. Whatever grievance you think you have with Miss Jameson, I suggest you take it up through proper legal channels if you believe you have a case. Carmichael's face flushed with anger. You're making a mistake, Hartfield. This woman is not what she seems. I'm a fair judge of character, Samuel replied coldly. And right now, yours is speaking volumes. Oliver, would you be kind enough to take Mr. Carmichael back to town? Oliver, clearly eager to extract himself from the situation, nodded quickly. Certainly, Sam. This isn't over, Carmichael said, glaring at Grace. I came a long way to clear my name from your slander, and I won't leave until I've done so. Good day, Mr. Carmichael, Samuel said firmly, stepping between Grace and the angry man. After a tense moment, Carmichael turned and climbed back into the wagon. As Oliver turned the horses, Carmichael called out, Ask her why she's really here, Hartfield. Ask her what she's running from. Grace watched the wagon depart, her hands trembling despite her outward composure. When they were out of earshot, Samuel turned to her, his expression unreadable. We should talk, he said quietly. Grace nodded, her throat tight with unshed tears. The children, Emma can watch them for a while. Samuel gestured toward his study, a small room off the main living area that Grace rarely entered. Inside, Samuel closed the door and indicated for Grace to take a seat. Instead of sitting behind his desk, he pulled a chair close to hers, their knees nearly touching. Tell me everything, he said simply. And please don't leave anything out this time. Grace took a deep breath, knowing the moment of full disclosure had arrived. Theodore Carmichael was one of the wealthiest men in Denver. His son, Albert, was in my class and struggling badly. When I reported this to Mr. Carmichael, he was furious, not with his son, but with me for suggesting his heir was less than perfect. Samuel nodded, encouraging her to continue. He demanded I change Albert's grades. When I refused, he began visiting the school frequently, ostensibly to check on his son's progress. But he would linger after hours, find reasons to speak with me alone. Grace clasped her hands tightly in her lap. At first, it seemed innocent enough, but then he began complimenting my appearance, standing too close, finding excuses to touch my hand or shoulder. Samuel's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. I made it clear his attentions were unwelcome, but he persisted. Then one evening, he was waiting outside the school when I left. He tried to kiss me, said he could advance my career if I was nice to him. Grace swallowed hard. When I threatened to report him to the school board, he laughed and reminded me who funded the school. Did you report him? Samuel asked quietly. I tried. The headmaster was sympathetic but afraid of losing Carmichael's financial support. He suggested I transfer Albert to another teacher to avoid further contact with Mr. Carmichael. And did that solve the problem? Grace laughed bitterly. Hardly. Carmichael was enraged. He began spreading rumors that I was incompetent, immoral, that I had tried to seduce him. Then the school closed due to financial difficulties. Carmichael had withdrawn his support. No other school would hire me with the rumors circulating. I was desperate, nearly destitute, when I saw your advertisement. Samuel was silent for a long moment, processing her story. Why didn't you tell me all of this when I asked why you left Denver? I was ashamed, Grace admitted. And afraid. Afraid you wouldn't believe me. Or worse, that you would but wouldn't want someone with such controversy around your children. I thought I was safe here, that he would never find me. How did he? I don't know, Grace said, shaking her head. Perhaps he has contacts in Wyoming, or maybe he traced the newspaper where your advertisement appeared. Samuel rose and paced the small room. The man strikes me as unbalanced to pursue you so far over a rejected advance. It wasn't just that, Grace explained. His pride was wounded when I rejected him, but his reputation was threatened when I tried to report him. Men like Theodore Carmichael are used to getting what they want and crushing anyone who stands in their way. Samuel stopped pacing and looked directly at her. Do you have any proof of his behavior? Witnesses? Grace's heart sank. No. He was careful. It was always his word against mine, and his word carried the weight of wealth and position. I believe you, Samuel said firmly, surprising her. You do? Grace whispered, hope rising within her. I've known you for nearly 2 months now, Grace. I've seen your character, your integrity, your kindness toward my children. That counts for far more than the accusations of a stranger, no matter how wealthy or influential. Tears filled Grace's eyes, and she blinked rapidly to contain them. Thank you. You have no idea what that means to me. Samuel knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. But we have a problem. Carmichael doesn't strike me as the type to give up easily. If he's come this far, he may try to cause trouble in Meadow Creek. I should leave, Grace said automatically. I won't bring scandal to your family. No. Samuel's grip on her hands tightened. Running didn't solve the problem before. It won't solve it now. We'll face this together. Together? Grace repeated, confused by the fierce protectiveness in his voice. Something shifted in Samuel's expression, a softening around his eyes that made Grace's heart beat faster. I hired a housekeeper, he said quietly. But I found much more. The children adore you. The house feels like a home again. And I. He paused, seeming to search for words. Samuel, I find myself looking forward to our conversations on the porch each evening, he continued. I notice the way sunlight catches in your hair when you're working in the garden. I hear your laugh when you're playing with the children, and it eases something in my heart that I thought was permanently broken. Grace stared at him, scarcely daring to breathe. What are you saying? I'm saying that I care for you, Grace Jameson. More than I expected to care for anyone after Elizabeth. And I won't let a man like Carmichael drive you away. The declaration hung in the air between them, transforming the atmosphere in the small study. Grace was acutely aware of Samuel's hands still holding hers, of the earnest expression in his eyes, of her own heart hammering against her ribs. I care for you too, she admitted softly. But this complicates everything. Carmichael will use any connection between us to validate his lies. Then let him, Samuel said with unexpected fierceness. I'm not ashamed of my feelings, and I won't hide them to appease a man like that. Before Grace could respond, a knock came at the study door. Samuel released her hands reluctantly and rose to open it. Emma stood in the doorway, her young face troubled. Pa? Mr. Wilson came back. He says Mr. Carmichael is staying at the hotel in town and telling everyone Miss Grace is not respectable. Samuel's expression hardened. Thank you, Emma. Would you check on your siblings, please? When Emma had gone, Samuel turned back to Grace. It seems Carmichael has wasted no time. We need to act quickly. What can we do? Grace asked, feeling helpless in the face of Carmichael's influence. First, we present a united front, Samuel said decisively. Tomorrow is Sunday. We'll attend church together as a family. Let the people of Meadow Creek judge for themselves who is more credible, a stranger with outlandish claims or the woman they've begun to know these past months. And if that's not enough, Samuel took her hand again, his touch sending warmth through her despite the gravity of their situation. Then we'll take further steps. But for now, hold your head high. You've done nothing wrong, Grace. As she looked into his determined face, Grace felt a surge of courage. For the first, Thank you, Pastor, Samuel replied. It's good to be here. They made their way to a pew near the middle of the church, the children filing in with Grace and Samuel taking the end seats. A few people nodded politely, but others whispered behind their hands. Grace spotted Mrs. Patterson on the opposite side, her expression troubled as she leaned toward another woman. Then the door opened again, and Theodore Carmichael entered, looking impeccable in an expensive suit that marked him as a city man among the more practical dress of the congregation. He took a seat near the front, nodding pleasantly to those around him as if he were an honored guest rather than a stranger. Ignore him, Samuel murmured, his hand briefly covering Grace's trembling fingers on the pew between them. The service began with familiar hymns, the congregation's voices rising in song. Grace tried to focus on the worship, but her attention kept drifting to the back of Carmichael's head, wondering what damage he had already done to her reputation in this community. When Pastor Davis rose to deliver his sermon, his choice of text seemed pointed. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Throughout the message on standing firm in the face of falsehood, Grace felt the pastor's eyes occasionally drift toward her. Had Samuel spoken with him? Or was the choice of topic merely a providential coincidence? After the final hymn, Pastor Davis made an announcement. Before we dismiss, I'd like to remind everyone of our annual harvest celebration next Saturday. The Ladies' Auxiliary will be organizing the food, and we'll need volunteers for setting up tables and games for the children. As the congregation began to disperse, Samuel placed a protective hand at the small of Grace's back, guiding her toward the exit. They had almost reached the door when Carmichael intercepted them. Mr. Hartfield, he said smoothly, I was hoping we might continue our conversation from yesterday, perhaps somewhere more private. I have nothing to discuss with you, Mr. Carmichael, Samuel replied coldly. That's unfortunate. Carmichael's gaze shifted to Grace. I had hoped to resolve this matter quietly, out of respect for the children. But if you insist on maintaining your association with Miss Jameson, I feel obligated to inform you that I've engaged the services of Sheriff Keller regarding certain items that went missing from my home coinciding with her abrupt departure from Denver." Grace gasped. "That's a lie. I never took anything from you." Several nearby congregants turned at her outburst, watching the exchange with undisguised interest. "The brooch that belonged to my late wife was quite valuable," Carmichael continued, his voice carrying just enough to be overheard. "I would hate to see charges of theft added to your other indiscretions." Samuel stepped forward, his expression dangerous. "That's enough. Make your accusations through proper legal channels if you dare, Carmichael. But be warned, false allegations have consequences. Is there a problem here?" Pastor Davis approached, his normally gentle face stern. "No problem, Pastor," Carmichael said, his manner instantly deferential. "Just a private matter being discussed." "Then perhaps it would be best discussed privately, not on church grounds immediately after worship," the pastor suggested firmly. Carmichael inclined his head in acquiescence. "Of course. My apologies." To Samuel, he added, "We'll continue this another time." As Carmichael walked away, Pastor Davis turned to Samuel and Grace. "I don't know the nature of your disagreement with that gentleman, but if you need someone to talk to, my door is always open." "Thank you, Pastor," Samuel said with genuine gratitude. "We may take you up on that offer." The children had been watching the exchange with wide eyes, and Grace noticed James's protective stance beside his younger siblings. They would have questions, no doubt, but for now, she was grateful they hadn't heard the specifics of Carmichael's accusations. As they made their way back to the wagon, several townspeople approached to greet them, some with genuine warmth, others with obvious curiosity barely disguised as neighborly concern. Mrs. Wilson was among the former, her honest face creased with worry as she pulled Grace aside. "Don't let that city fellow bother you, dear," she said in a low voice. "Oliver told me what happened yesterday. Anyone who's seen you with those children knows what kind of woman you are." Tears pricked Grace's eyes at the unexpected support. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. That means more than you know." As they drove home, the children peppered them with questions about Carmichael and why he seemed angry with Grace. Samuel answered as honestly as he could without sharing details inappropriate for young ears. "Mr. Carmichael is upset with Miss Grace because of something that happened in Denver," he explained. "He's telling stories that aren't true, and we need to be prepared for people in town to ask questions." "Is Miss Grace in trouble?" William asked anxiously. "No," Samuel said firmly. "Miss Grace hasn't done anything wrong. Sometimes adults have disagreements that get complicated." "Is he going to make Miss Grace leave?" Martha's small voice quavered with fear. Grace turned to look at the children. "I'm not planning to go anywhere," she assured them, though her heart ached at the worry on their faces. Back at the ranch, Samuel suggested the children play in the yard while he and Grace discussed their next steps. In the privacy of the kitchen, Grace paced anxiously. "He's accusing me of theft now. What will be next?" This is exactly how it began in Denver. One accusation leading to another until my reputation was in tatters. Samuel leaned against the counter, his face grim. "He's escalating because he sees that his original claims aren't getting the response he wanted. But false accusations of theft are serious. If he pursues this with the sheriff, we need to be prepared. How can I defend myself against something that never happened?" "We need to understand his true motives," Samuel reasoned. "Is this really about wounded pride, or is there something more?" Grace stopped pacing. "What do you mean? A man doesn't travel hundreds of miles simply because a woman rejected him, even a man as arrogant as Carmichael. There must be something else at stake." "His reputation, perhaps," Grace suggested. "If anyone in Denver believed my account of his behavior, it could damage his standing in society." "That's possible, but—" Samuel was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. They moved to the window to see Sheriff Keller riding toward the house, accompanied by another man. Grace's blood ran cold. "He's actually brought the sheriff," she whispered. Samuel's expression hardened. "Let me handle this. Stay calm and remember, I believe you." The sheriff and his companion dismounted, and Samuel went to meet them on the porch. Grace remained just inside the door, close enough to hear the conversation. "Afternoon, Sam," Sheriff Keller said, removing his hat. "Sorry to trouble you on a Sunday, but I've got some questions that need answering." "Concerning what, Sheriff?" Samuel asked, his voice level. "Got a complaint from this gentleman here. The sheriff jerked his thumb toward the other man, who Grace now recognized as a clerk from the hotel. Says Mr. Carmichael is missing some valuables from his room, and he's pointing the finger at your housekeeper. That's absurd, Samuel said flatly. Miss Jameson hasn't been to town since yesterday morning, and she certainly hasn't been in Carmichael's hotel room. I understand that, Sam. But Mr. Carmichael is claiming she has a history of theft, and now his watch has gone missing. I have to investigate. His watch. Grace stepped onto the porch, indignation overriding her fear. Sheriff Keller, I have never stolen anything in my life, and I haven't been near Mr. Carmichael's belongings. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. Miss Jameson, no one's accusing you directly. I'm just following procedure. Carmichael is manipulating you, Samuel said bluntly. He came here yesterday making wild accusations about Miss Jameson because she rejected his advances in Denver and reported his inappropriate behavior. When that didn't work, he's escalated to false claims of theft. The hotel clerk shifted awkwardly. I don't mean to cause trouble, but Mr. Carmichael was quite insistent. Said his watch was on the dresser last night and gone this morning after the maid cleaned his room. And how does that involve Miss Jameson? Samuel demanded. He said, well, he implied she might have an accomplice in town. Grace let out a disbelieving laugh. An accomplice? Sheriff, this is getting ridiculous. I've hardly left this ranch in 2 months, and I certainly don't have criminal connections in Meadow Creek. Sheriff Keller rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. I admit it sounds far-fetched, but I still need to ask, do you know anything about a gold pocket watch? No, Grace said firmly. The only time I've seen Mr. Carmichael with a watch was in Denver, when he used to check it ostentatiously during parent meetings to indicate he had more important places to be. The sheriff seemed to consider this, then nodded slowly. All right, I'll tell Mr. Carmichael I found no evidence to support his claim. But Sam, Miss Jameson, be careful. This fellow strikes me as the persistent type. After the sheriff and the clerk departed, Samuel and Grace retreated to the kitchen where Grace sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. It's happening again, she said, her voice hollow. Just like in Denver. One accusation after another, each more outlandish than the last, but each doing more damage. Samuel poured her a glass of water. Except this time, you're not alone. Sheriff Keller is a fair man. He doesn't seem convinced by Carmichael's claims. For now, Grace said bitterly. But who knows what Carmichael will say next? Or who he'll convince? Samuel sat across. But the circumstances, with Carmichael's accusations hanging over us, people would think exactly what he wants them to think, that there's been impropriety between us. Some might, Samuel acknowledged, but those who matter know better. And in time, the rest would see the truth. Grace rose from the chair and moved to the window, needing space to think. Outside, the children were playing, their laughter carrying on the summer air. She had grown to love them in these past months. Their unique personalities, their resilience, their capacity for joy despite their loss. And Samuel, she turned to face him. I won't allow you to sacrifice yourself to protect me. Your reputation, your standing in this community, your children's future, all would be affected by tying yourself to someone under suspicion. Samuel stood and crossed to her. It's not a sacrifice. Grace, I lost Elizabeth, and I never thought I'd find love again. I wasn't looking for it when I posted that advertisement for a housekeeper. But sometimes life brings unexpected gifts. Love, Grace whispered, the word catching in her throat. Yes, love, Samuel said simply. I love you, Grace Jameson. Not because you're an excellent housekeeper or wonderful with my children, though you are both those things. I love you for your courage, your integrity, your gentle heart. I love the way you stand up for what's right, even when it costs you. I love how you see the best in my children, in me. Tears filled Grace's eyes. I love you too, she admitted. But I'm afraid. Afraid that Carmichael will destroy this happiness before it has a chance to truly begin. Samuel took her hands in his. Then don't let him. Don't give him that power. Marry me, Grace. Not in haste or secrecy, but proudly, before the whole community. Let's show Carmichael and anyone else who might doubt you that our love is stronger than their suspicion. Grace looked into his earnest face and felt her resistance crumbling. She had come to Wyoming seeking safety and a fresh start. Instead, she had found a family, a home, and a love she had never expected. Yes, she said finally. I'll marry you, Samuel Hartfield. His face broke into a smile that transformed his features, erasing the worry lines that had appeared during their confrontation with Carmichael. He drew her into his arms, holding her close as if afraid she might change her mind. "We should tell the children," Grace murmured against his shoulder. "They'll be overjoyed," Samuel assured her. "They already love you." As they stood embracing in the warm kitchen, Grace felt a curious mixture of joy and trepidation. She had accepted Samuel's proposal with her whole heart, believing in their love and their future together. But Theodore Carmichael's shadow still loomed, and something told her that their challenges were far from over. What she couldn't know was that even as they planned to announce their engagement, Carmichael was setting in motion a scheme that would test their love and resolve in ways they could scarcely imagine, a scheme that would either destroy them or bind them together more strongly than ever. The children's reactions to the news of their engagement varied predictably. Martha clapped her hands in delight. William asked practical questions about whether Grace would still make cookies. Emma offered a shy smile of approval, and James regarded them thoughtfully before asking to speak with his father alone. Grace gave them privacy, taking the younger children to prepare dinner while Samuel and James walked toward the barn. Through the kitchen window, she watched their serious conversation, saw James's animated gestures, followed by Samuel's steady response. Finally, James nodded, and the two embraced before returning to the house. Later, after the children were in bed, Samuel joined Grace on the porch for their customary evening conversation. "James had concerns?" Grace asked gently. Samuel nodded. "He wanted to make sure I wasn't replacing his mother, that I wasn't rushing into this because of Carmichael's pressure, and that you truly cared for all of them, not just me." Wise questions for a 12-year-old. "He's had to grow up fast," Samuel acknowledged. "But once I addressed his concerns, he gave his blessing. He admitted he's come to respect you, especially after how you handled his injury with the mare." Grace smiled, relieved. "And what about our more immediate concern? What do we do about Carmichael? I spoke with Pastor Davis this afternoon while you were preparing dinner. He's agreed to announce our engagement next Sunday and perform the ceremony in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Grace's eyes widened. That's very soon. Soon enough to demonstrate our commitment, but not so hasty as to appear desperate, Samuel reasoned. And it gives us time to prepare properly. Grace nodded, though anxiety still churned in her stomach. And until then, Carmichael doesn't strike me as the type to gracefully accept defeat. No, he doesn't, Samuel agreed grimly. We need to be vigilant. I don't want you going to town alone until this is resolved. And perhaps we should look into Carmichael's background, see if there's something there that explains his obsessive behavior. How would we do that? I have a friend in Cheyenne who works for the territorial government. I could write to him, ask him to make inquiries in Denver. Grace considered this. It might help. There was always something excessive about his pursuit. Even for a man of his position and ego, his reaction to my rejection seemed extreme. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the night sounds of the prairie surrounding them. I never imagined finding love like this, Grace said softly. When I left Denver, I was simply hoping to survive. Samuel took her hand. And now I'm hoping to live, truly live. She squeezed his fingers. To build a life with you and the children, to put down roots so deep that no man like Carmichael could ever uproot them. Samuel lifted her hand to his lips. We will. Together. The following days settled into a cautious routine. News of their engagement spread through the community, met with a mixture of congratulations and whispers. Samuel wrote to his friend in Cheyenne, and they waited anxiously for a response. Carmichael, meanwhile, remained in Meadow Creek, taking his meals at the hotel restaurant and conversing affably with townspeople. According to Mrs. Patterson, who sent a note with Oliver Wilson, he was portraying himself as a There was a moment of silence before Emma spoke. We're happy about it. Miss Grace is kind, and Pa smiles more when she's around. It doesn't feel too soon after your mother's passing? James's voice came next, surprisingly firm. Mother wouldn't want Pa to be alone. She told me before she died to take care of him, to make sure he didn't shut himself away with his grief. Grace nearly dropped the teacup she was holding. Samuel had never mentioned this conversation between Elizabeth and their eldest son. That sounds like my sister, Mrs. Collins acknowledged, her voice softer. She was always thinking of others, even at the end. When Grace returned with the tea tray, the atmosphere in the room had shifted subtly. Mrs. Collins still regarded her with wariness, but some of the outright hostility had faded. "Miss Jameson, the children tell me you were a teacher in Denver before coming here," she said, accepting a cup of tea. "Yes, for 5 years," Grace confirmed. "And yet you left that position to become a housekeeper in Wyoming Territory? That seems an unusual choice." Grace felt 4 pairs of young eyes on her, aware that her answer needed to be truthful yet appropriate for the children's ears. "Circumstances in Denver changed. The school closed, and I was seeking a fresh start." "I see," Mrs. Collins said, though her tone suggested she didn't believe the explanation was complete. "The children also tell me there's been some unpleasantness with a man from your past." Grace's cheeks flushed. "There has been a misunderstanding with a former employer. It's being resolved." "Misunderstandings that require resolution often involve more than meets the eye," Mrs. Collins observed, sipping her tea. Before Grace could respond, the sound of horses outside drew everyone's attention. A moment later, Samuel entered, stopping short at the sight of his sister-in-law. "Eleanor," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "This is unexpected." Mrs. Collins rose to greet him. "Samuel, it seems I've missed a great deal during my travels, including my sister's funeral and your sudden engagement." The reunion between Samuel and Mrs. Collins was cordial but strained. After initial greetings, Samuel suggested the children show their aunt the improvements to the ranch while he spoke privately with Grace. "Are you all right?" he asked as soon as they were alone. "Eleanor can be formidable. She's concerned for the children," Grace said diplomatically. "That's understandable." Samuel ran a hand through his hair. Her timing couldn't be worse, with Carmichael still in town spreading his poison. "Has she met him?" "I don't know. She said she came directly from the train station to the ranch, but she must have spent at least one night in town." Grace's stomach tightened with anxiety. If Carmichael discovers she's Elizabeth's sister, he'll certainly approach her with his version of events. "We need to tell her the full truth before he can," Samuel decided. "Eleanor loved her sister, and she cares deeply for the children. If she understands the real situation, she might become an ally rather than another obstacle." That evening, after the children were in bed, Samuel explained everything to Eleanor: Grace's history with Carmichael, the false accusations, and the real reasons behind their engagement, including their genuine feelings for each other. Eleanor listened silently, her expression giving nothing away until Samuel finished speaking. Then she turned to Grace. "This man, Carmichael, he followed you here from Denver to continue his persecution?" Grace nodded. "It appears so." "That suggests a disturbing level of obsession," Eleanor said thoughtfully. "No rational man would go to such lengths over a rejected advance, even one with an inflated sense of his own importance." "Exactly what I've been thinking," Samuel agreed. "There must be more to it." Eleanor studied Grace intently. "You reported his behavior to the school headmaster. Was there anyone else you spoke to about his inappropriate actions?" "A colleague at the school," Grace recalled. "Margaret Wells. She advised me to document everything, which I did in my personal journal. But when I left Denver, I was in such haste that I left it behind." Eleanor's eyes sharpened with interest. "This journal, where exactly did you leave it?" "In my boarding house room. I had hidden it beneath a loose floorboard, fearful that Carmichael might somehow gain access to my belongings." "And it contained detailed accounts of his behavior?" "Yes, every incident, dated and described precisely." Eleanor turned to Samuel. "That journal could be crucial evidence against Carmichael's claims. If it still exists, retrieving it could turn the tide in Grace's favor." "Denver is hundreds of miles away," Samuel pointed out. "And we don't know if the journal is still there or if the boarding house even has the same management." "I have contacts in Denver," Eleanor said decisively. "I can send a telegram tomorrow requesting they look into the matter." Grace stared at her in surprise. "You would do that for me?" Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "I'm doing it for my sister's children. If what you and Samuel have told me is true, and I'm inclined to believe it is, then Carmichael represents a threat to their happiness and stability. I won't allow that." Relief washed over Grace. "Thank you, Mrs. Collins." "Eleanor, please," the older woman said. "If you're to be my sister-in-law, we should dispense with formalities." It wasn't wholehearted approval, but it was a start. As Eleanor retired to the guest room for the night, Samuel took Grace's hand. "That went better than I expected," he said quietly. "She's reserving judgment," Grace cautioned. And she's right to be concerned about the timing of our engagement. Eleanor was always protective of Elizabeth. They were close despite the 10-year age difference between them. But she's fair-minded. Once she gets to know you better, she'll see what I see. Grace leaned her head against his shoulder, drawing strength from his unwavering support. I hope your friend in Cheyenne responds soon. The more we know about Carmichael, the better prepared we'll be for whatever he does next. What they couldn't know was that Theodore Carmichael had already set his next plan in motion, one that would strike at the heart of their newfound happiness and test the strength of their love in ways they had yet to imagine. The following day, Eleanor Collins rode into town with Samuel, ostensibly to send her telegram to Denver, but also to take the measure of Theodore Carmichael for herself. Grace remained at the ranch with the children, the morning passing in a blur of normal activities made tense by her awareness of what might be transpiring in Meadow Creek. After lunch, as Grace supervised the children's lessons at the kitchen table, the sound of an approaching rider caught her attention. Through the window, she saw a young man on horseback, a stranger, not Samuel, returning early. Keep working on your sums, she instructed the children. I'll see who's here. Grace stepped onto the porch as the rider dismounted. He was perhaps 20, with a freckled face and a nervous demeanor. Miss Jameson? He asked, removing his hat. Yes, that's me. I'm Tim Barker, ma'am. I work at the telegraph office in Meadow Creek. Mr. Hartfield asked me to bring you this right away. He extended an envelope. Said it was urgent. Grace accepted it with trepidation. Thank you. Would you like some water before you head back? No, thank you, ma'am. I should get back. Mr. Hartfield said to tell you he and Mrs. Collins will be delayed in town. There's been some trouble. Trouble? What kind of trouble? The young man shifted uncomfortably. I don't rightly know all the details, ma'am. Just that the sheriff needed to speak with Mr. Hartfield about something. After Tim departed, Grace tore open the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a brief note in Samuel's handwriting. Grace, a telegram arrived from my friend in Cheyenne with disturbing information about Carmichael. He is wanted for questioning in Denver regarding financial improprieties. More concerning, his first wife did not die of illness as widely believed. There are suspicions of foul play, though nothing was proven. Eleanor is helping me present this information to Sheriff Keller. Stay at the ranch with the children. Keep the doors locked. We will return as soon as possible. All my love. Samuel. Grace read the note twice, her mind racing. If Carmichael was suspected of harming his first wife, his obsessive pursuit of Grace took on a far more sinister dimension. He wasn't merely a spurned suitor seeking revenge. He was potentially dangerous. She folded the note and returned to the kitchen, trying to maintain a calm facade for the children's benefit. Your father and aunt will be a little late returning from town, she told them. Let's finish our lessons, then perhaps we can bake cookies for their return. The children seemed to accept this explanation, though James gave her a searching look that suggested he sensed her unease. They continued with their schoolwork while Grace's mind churned with questions and fears. Had Carmichael followed her to Wyoming not simply to discredit her, but for some darker purpose? The possibility sent a chill down her spine. The afternoon crawled by, each hour increasing Grace's anxiety. She kept the children close to the house, inventing reasons why they couldn't play in the barn or check the chicken coop as they normally would. By supper time, with no sign of Samuel and Eleanor, even the younger children had begun to sense something was wrong. Why isn't Pa home yet? William asked as Grace served a simple meal of beans and cornbread. He's never this late without sending word. He did send word, Grace reminded him. Remember the young man who came with the note? Your father and Aunt Eleanor had business in town that's taking longer than expected. What kind of business? James asked directly. Grace hesitated, unwilling to lie but equally unwilling to share her concerns about Carmichael with the children. Adult business, James. Your father will explain when he returns. As darkness fell, Grace lit the lamps and tried to maintain a normal evening routine. She supervised the younger children's baths, listened to Emma's reading practice, and helped Martha with her sewing. But her ears strained for the sound of returning horses, and she found herself checking the windows frequently. By the children's bedtime, there was still no sign of Samuel and Eleanor. Grace tucked the younger ones in with assurances that their father would be home when they woke, but she could see doubt in their eyes. James lingered after his siblings had gone to bed, sitting at the kitchen table where Grace was pretending to mend a shirt while actually listening intently for approaching riders. "It's about that man, isn't it?" he asked abruptly. "The one who's been saying bad things about you." Grace looked up, meeting his direct gaze. "Yes, James. It's about Mr. Carmichael. Pa thinks he's dangerous." It wasn't a question, but Grace answered anyway. "Your father is concerned, yes. That's why he wanted us to stay here while he and your aunt speak with the sheriff." James nodded solemnly. "I can get Pa's rifle if you want. He taught me how to use it for emergencies." The offer, coming from this serious 12-year-old, nearly broke Grace's heart. "That won't be necessary, James. But thank you for offering to protect us. You're becoming a fine young man. If Pa doesn't come back tonight, what will we do?" Grace reached across the table and took his hand. "Your father will come back. But if they're very late, we'll simply go about our normal routine tomorrow and wait for them." James seemed to accept this, though reluctantly. After he went to bed, Grace locked all the doors and windows, then sat in the main room with a lamp burning low, too anxious to sleep. Around midnight, she heard horses approaching. Relief flooded through her as she hurried to the window, but it turned to confusion when she saw not Samuel and Eleanor, but 3 riders she didn't recognize. They halted in the yard, and one dismounted, approaching the house. Grace's heart hammered in her chest as a heavy knock sounded on the door. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steadier than she felt. "Message from Samuel Hartfield, ma'am," a male voice replied. "For Miss Grace Jameson." Grace hesitated, Samuel's warnings echoing in her mind. "Slide it under the door, please." There was a pause. Then a folded paper appeared beneath the door. Grace retrieved it, but didn't immediately open the door. "Thank you," she called. "You can go now." "Ma'am, Mr. Hartfield said you'd want to come with us," the voice persisted. "There's been trouble in town. He's at Doc Walker's place, asking for you." Fear clutched at Grace's heart. "Samuel's injured?" "Yes, ma'am. Nothing life-threatening, but he's asking for you. Mrs. Collins is with him, and she sent us to escort you safely." Grace unfolded the note, which did appear to be in Samuel's handwriting, though hastier than usual. "Grace, *, please come with the bearers of this note. I've been injured in a confrontation with Carmichael. Nothing serious, but I need to see you. Eleanor will remain with the children at the ranch. Trust the messengers. They're friends of Sheriff Keller. *, Samuel something about the note felt wrong, but Grace couldn't put her finger on what. And if Samuel was truly injured and asking for her. "Just a moment," she called. "I need to get my shawl and leave a note for the children." Grace quickly pinned a note explaining where she had gone, leaving it on the kitchen table where James would find it in the morning. She grabbed her shawl and, after a moment's hesitation, Samuel's small revolver from the drawer where he kept it. Tucking it into her pocket, she approached the door. Hand on the latch, she paused. "How was Mr. Hartfield injured?" "Carmichael attacked him outside the hotel, ma'am," the voice replied. "Hit him with something heavy. Doc says he'll be fine, but he's got a nasty gash on his head." The explanation sounded plausible, but uncertainty still nagged at Grace. "And Mrs. Collins sent you specifically?" "Yes, ma'am. She's mighty worried about her brother-in-law. Please, we should hurry." Grace took a deep breath and opened the door. 3 men stood in the yard, their features shadowed in the dim light from the house. The nearest, a stocky man with a beard, smiled reassuringly. "Glad you're coming, Miss Jameson. Mr. Hartfield will be relieved to see you." As Grace stepped forward, the man suddenly grabbed her arm, his grip painfully tight. "Got her," he called to his companions. Grace tried to scream, but a rough hand clamped over her mouth. She struggled fiercely, reaching for the revolver, but her arms were pinned to her sides as the men dragged her toward the horses. "Stop fighting, woman," one hissed in her ear. "We're not going to hurt you if you cooperate. Carmichael just wants to talk." At the mention of Carmichael, Grace's fears crystallized into certainty. This was a trap, and she had walked right into it. Samuel wasn't injured. He probably wasn't even in town. And Eleanor had never sent these men. With renewed desperation, Grace fought against her captors. She managed to break one arm free and reach for the revolver, but one of the men saw the movement and grabbed her wrist, twisting until she cried out in pain. "She's got a gun," he shouted, wrenching the weapon from her pocket. "Didn't expect that," another muttered. "Tie her hands. We can't risk her making more trouble." As they bound her wrists with rough rope, Grace's mind raced. The children were alone in the house, unprotected. Samuel and Eleanor might not return until morning. By then, Carmichael could have taken her far from Meadow Creek. The children, she gasped as the gag was temporarily removed. Please, there are children alone in the house. Not our concern, the bearded man said coldly. Carmichael paid us to bring you to him, nothing else. The gag was replaced, and Grace was lifted onto a horse, seated in front of one of the men who held her firmly around the waist. As they rode away from the ranch, tears of fear and rage streamed down her face. Carmichael leaned forward, his mask of civility slipping to reveal the rage beneath. You were about to marry into a respected family in this territory. Establish yourself as a pillar of the community. How long before you felt secure enough to share your stories about me? Before your devoted husband decided to make inquiries in Denver that might resurrect questions better left buried. Questions about your wife's death? Grace said boldly, watching his reaction. Carmichael's face darkened. What do you know about that? Enough to understand why you're so desperate to silence me. Grace replied, gambling on the fragments of information from Samuel's note. It's not just about a rejected advance or damaged pride. You're afraid of what might be uncovered if people start looking too closely at your past. For a moment, Carmichael's composure cracked completely, raw fury transforming his features. Then, with visible effort, he regained control. Clever, Miss Jameson. Very clever. But knowing fragments of the truth won't save you. He stood, pacing the small room. I had planned to simply discredit you, to force you to leave Meadow Creek as you left Denver. But now I see that won't be sufficient. Fear coursed through Grace at his implication. Samuel will come for me, she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. He already knows about your wife. He's probably already spoken to Sheriff Keller. By the time they piece together what's happened, we'll be long gone, Carmichael said dismissively. I have arrangements in place to leave the territory. You'll be coming with me, of course. I won't go anywhere with you, Grace declared. Carmichael smiled coldly. You misunderstand, Miss Jameson. I'm not offering you a choice. Outside, voices rose in argument. Carmichael frowned, moving to the door just as one of his hired men burst in. Riders coming, the man reported tersely. At least 3, moving fast. It can't be Hartfield already, Carmichael muttered, though uncertainty crossed his face. Who else knows about this place? Don't know, but they'll be here in minutes. What do you want us to do? Carmichael hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Prepare to leave. We'll take the back trail toward the border. To Grace, he added, it seems our conversation will have to continue elsewhere. Hope surged in Grace's heart at the thought of rescue so close. As Carmichael turned to gather his belongings, she saw her opportunity. With her bound hands, she grabbed the heavy water pitcher from the table and smashed it against the back of his head with all her strength. Carmichael crumpled to the floor with a startled cry. The hired man cursed, reaching for his gun, but Grace was already moving, driving her shoulder into his midsection with desperate force. The impact sent them both crashing into the shelves, provisions tumbling around them as they fell. Grace scrambled to her feet, hands still bound, and ran for the door. Outside, she could hear hoofbeats approaching rapidly. She threw herself through the doorway, nearly colliding with another of Carmichael's men who was running toward the cabin. Help! She screamed as loudly as she could. Help me! The man grabbed for her, but Grace dodged, her feet finding unexpected purchase on the uneven ground. She ran toward the sound of the approaching riders, heart pounding, lungs burning. Behind her, shouts erupted as Carmichael's men realized she was escaping. A shot rang out, the bullet splintering bark from a tree near her head. Grace zigzagged through the trees, praying the darkness would shield her from their aim. Then, ahead of her, she saw riders emerging from the tree line, 3 figures silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky. With a sob of relief, she recognized Samuel's tall form in the lead. Samuel, she cried, stumbling toward them. Grace! His voice carried through the darkness, filled with equal parts relief and fury. He spurred his horse forward, closing the distance between them. More shots rang out from the direction of the cabin. Samuel swung down from his horse in one fluid motion, gathering Grace into his arms while keeping his body between her and the gunfire. Are you hurt? He demanded, his fingers working quickly to untie her bonds. No, just frightened, she managed, tears streaming down her face. "Carmichael, I hit him with a pitcher. He's in the cabin." "Sheriff," Samuel called to one of the other riders. "She's here, and she's safe." Sheriff Keller and the third rider, whom Grace now recognized as Oliver Wilson, dismounted, guns drawn. "Carmichael's men are armed," Grace warned as Samuel freed her hands at last. "Stay here with Oliver," Samuel instructed, helping her onto his horse. "The sheriff and I will handle this." "Be careful," Grace pleaded, clutching his hand. "Carmichael is desperate. He knows you've discovered something about his wife's death." Samuel's expression hardened. "We know everything now, Grace." Eleanor's telegram from Denver arrived this evening with the full story. Carmichael isn't just wanted for questioning. He's fleeing a murder charge. Before Grace could absorb this shocking revelation, more gunfire erupted from the cabin. Samuel squeezed her hand once, then joined Sheriff Keller in advancing toward the source of the shots, using trees for cover. Oliver positioned himself protectively near Grace, his rifle ready. "Are you really all right, Miss Jameson?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she assured him, though her body trembled with reaction now that the immediate danger had passed. "How did you find me so quickly?" "James," Oliver explained. "Smart boy, you're almost stepson." When those men came to the ranch, he heard voices and looked out his window, saw them taking you away, and rode to town immediately to alert his father. Samuel, Mrs. Collins, and the sheriff were at the telegraph office when he arrived. Grace's heart swelled with pride for James's quick thinking and courage. Thank God he did. Indeed, Oliver agreed. Though Samuel would have moved heaven and earth to find you regardless. I've never seen a man so determined. The exchange of gunfire had stopped, replaced by shouted commands from Sheriff Keller. After several tense minutes, Samuel appeared from the trees, waving for them to approach. "It's over," he called. "Carmichael and his men have surrendered." Oliver helped Grace dismount, and she ran to Samuel, who enfolded her in his arms. She clung to him, breathing in his familiar scent, feeling the solid strength of him against her. "I thought I'd lost you," he murmured into her hair. "Never," she promised. "I knew you'd come." As the eastern sky lightened with the first hints of dawn, Sheriff Keller emerged from the cabin with Carmichael and his 3 hired men, all in handcuffs. Carmichael's face was a mask of hatred as he saw Grace in Samuel's protective embrace. "This changes nothing," he spat. "You're still a liar and a thief." "The only liar here is you, Carmichael," Sheriff Keller said disgustedly. "We received confirmation from Denver this evening. Your wife didn't die of illness, she was poisoned. And you're the primary suspect." Carmichael's face went ashen. "That's absurd. There was no evidence." "There is now," the sheriff cut him off. "Your wife's lady's maid came forward with new testimony, and the Denver authorities have been examining your financial records. Seems you were nearly bankrupt until your wife's fortune came into your hands upon her death. When Miss Jameson rejected your advances and threatened to report your behavior," Samuel added, his voice cold with contempt. "You feared any close scrutiny of your character might lead investigators to reconsider your wife's death. That's why you pursued Grace so relentlessly, not because of wounded pride, but to protect your freedom and your stolen wealth." Carmichael's eyes darted between them, the calculation in his gaze giving way to desperation. "You can't prove any of this. It's all circumstantial." "Perhaps," Sheriff Keller acknowledged. "But kidnapping Miss Jameson is not circumstantial. That's a crime you committed right here in Wyoming Territory, with multiple witnesses. You'll stand trial for that while the Denver authorities build their murder case." As the sheriff led Carmichael and his men to the horses, Grace leaned heavily against Samuel, the events of the night catching up with her. "Let's go home," she whispered. "The children will be worried." "Eleanor is with them," Samuel assured her. "But yes, let's go home. Our family is waiting." The word family warmed Grace from within, chasing away the last of her fear. As Samuel helped her onto his horse and mounted behind her, his arms secure around her waist, she felt a profound sense of homecoming. The nightmare of Theodore Carmichael was over. Ahead lay a future bright with promise, a home filled with love, children who needed her, and a man whose steadfast heart had found its match in hers. From the ashes of her former life, a new one had blossomed, more beautiful than she could have imagined when she first saw that simple advertisement. Single father posted for housekeeper, found perfect mother for his children. 3 weeks later, The Meadow Creek Church was filled to overflowing as Grace Jameson became Grace Hartfield. The scandal of Carmichael's kidnapping attempt and subsequent arrest had transformed the community's perception of the former schoolteacher. Where there had been whispers of impropriety, there was now admiration for her courage and sympathy for her ordeal. Eleanor Collins stood proudly as Grace's matron of honor, her initial reservations completely dispelled. In the days following the rescue, Grace's journal had arrived from Denver, sent by Eleanor's contacts who had found it exactly where Grace had hidden it. The detailed account of Carmichael's harassment, written